Hey everyone, so today I'll be reviewing Northwoods by Daniel Mason. It's a very interesting cover. There's a cougar in the front just lounging out, kind of just chilling over there with this like 18th century style pasture. Pretty cool. It's hard to define this book, I would say. I would call it literary historical fiction that's connected chronologically by these short stories, but they're technically not short stories because the ending of one does affect what happens in the beginning and middle and end of the next one. And they do sort of connect in a way, but not in a way that's confusing or jumbled. It's done in a very chronological, cohesive way. It's hard to summarize this book completely. Um, I don't want to give away a lot of the contents or spoil anything, but I will give out like the first maybe 100 pages of the novel, so if you don't want to hear any of that, you can just skip to like a few minutes later. Um, the book begins with two runaway Puritan lovers just tumbling down the valley in western Massachusetts where they hide from a group of police, and they go from Boston to western Massachusetts, which is pretty far, at least 100 miles, and they did that by foot, which is pretty impressive. And together they build a log cabin. And decades later, that same Puritan woman who runs away with the guy ends up dying, and she marries a Native American guy who also ends up dying. But by then, she's sort of taken in by a tribe, and she dons Native American clothing. I forget the tribe name. There's a few tribes in that area at the time. I'm not sure which one she belonged to. Um, but, given her age, it's not said outright that it's the same woman, but given her age and the allusions to her dead husband in the log cabin, it's definitely the same woman. The novel does that a lot. It doesn't explicitly tell you the date it's in, but there's some clear context clues so you know, like, oh, it's the Revolutionary War, oh, it's the 60s, it's the 80s. So don't worry about that. So a few decades later, a Puritan woman is abducted by natives and comes under the care of the lady who raised the log cabin all those years ago. And the newly abducted woman comes to trust this lady. She's pretty prejudiced, this new woman who comes in. She trusts her because she's white and because she's Christian in a land full of natives. And then a bunch of soldiers come to the cabin, and like one of them pulls out a severed hand and they threaten the two women. Then they defend themselves with an axe. And one of the soldiers recently ate an apple, and that apple ended up germinating in the chest of the dead soldiers that the woman clobbered with axes and killed them. And then one of the seeds inside the guy's stomach ends up becoming an apple tree. And then decades later, again, around the Revolutionary War, a botanist named Charles Osgood, who's obsessed with apples, he goes into western Massachusetts from Albany near the town of Oakfield. He finds the dilapidated cabin, and right next to it lies a fruiting apple tree. I'm pretty sure it's the same apple tree that came out of the soldier's stomach. And the apple is delicious. It's one of the best apples he's tasted. And so he goes on and brings his two daughters and wife to the middle of nowhere, basically, and they raise an orchard, and the orchard does become successful. You can see over and over again that the cabin changes with each life that inhabits it. You can think of the cabin as a main character and the people as the setting. The people define the environment, and the environment also affects and defines their actions. Yeah, so there's that interplay of different cause and effects between environment and people. I would say, that's about the first 100 pages or so. The rest of the book is the same short stories that are connected, so technically not isolated short stories at all. Definitely a novel, a cohesive novel. But you can see how everything is constantly changing. The book really is concerned with the transient nature of human life, but also how people make meaning to a place, give meaning to a place. Because yes, the setting is important. The main character is a plot of land, but if it weren't for the characters, we would just have maybe 50 pages of pure descriptions of the forest. So whether it's through the eyes of the two Osgood children who grow up to be unmarried women, or the eye of a botanist, or a guy who is hunting runaway slaves from the South, or a renowned American painter, or a true crime writer, many people cross the paths and call the place their home. And there's also some major paranormal activity in this book from the previous inhabitants. The book, I would say, is a study of the form of the written word. As the time period progresses, you can see that the writing goes from, flowery, colonial, constant references to God and the Bible, to modern present-day writing and everything in between. There are letters, journal entries, letters to historical societies, diary entries. The characters and writing style and the form, the medium change. Eventually, the orchard becomes a forest again at one point, and then gets turned into a vacation home, and it just goes through many moltings of different purposes of in different ways of life, different ways people make use of that same plot of land over the years. So everything changes, but the human lives are not trivial. They're dealt with great importance. The human lives define the novel, which I also find fascinating because I often wondered, the piece of land that is my house, the small acreage that it is, what it was 400 years ago, 300 years ago, 200 years ago. Was it a colonial era's person's property, just their backwoods? I've also heard that the main street of my street was actually a wealthy person's driveway. So there's so many lives that are forgotten that lived where you live now. And this book shows that story and how maybe the memories or the ghosts or the, residual energy of those people who lived where you are do affect you. So really interesting, otherworldly sort of themes are happening here. No matter what the time period this book takes place in, the writing throughout the book is rich with detailed and gorgeous passages about describing nature and its constant changing throughout the year, thus continuing the theme of transient change. There are some really fascinating passages of how plant diversity changes, how the dominant species sort of shift. Anyone interested in plant succession and ecology and history will love this book like I did. My major was environmental science, so I knew exactly everything that he was talking about. And I was surprised that there was like a mainstream literary novel that talks about stuff I just recently learned in college. So I hope a lot of people get introduced to different ecological concepts in this book. It's very interesting. But it's more than just, purely academic ecological studies. There's real heart and compassion in this novel. It's it's a great study of the written word. It's amazing. I gave this book 5 stars. It is both brilliant and gripping, and I will read Tess Gunty's review in the back of the book. She wrote, "It's ambitious, alive, and lush with generosity. Northwoods is an immersive sprint through time. It offers an inventive portrait of the individual and the collective, a vivid history of a cabin and a country, inhabiting each of its characters with a compassion that took my breath away. I emerged from this book as though from an enchanted forest, covered in leaves and changed by what I had seen there, electrifying." So yeah, I agree with her completely. This book is definitely a compassionate, a humane view on different generations of people, and I found it just simply lovely. It was amazing. The author is a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. I think this book should have also been a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize for 2023. So yeah, it's very inspiring. I loved it. I definitely recommend reading it if you just love reading. Anyone who loves reading stuff that's not so easy to read, makes you work a little bit, but not that much. It's definitely much better than the last book I reviewed, Fourth Wing. It's like leaps and bounds better than that. So anyway, thank you for watching, and that's all for now, but I'll keep reading, and I'll see you soon.